Welcome to Night Shift Knowledge, a quiet place in the late hours where you can finally let go of the day. Take a moment to settle in, soften your shoulders, and allow the busy world to fade completely into the background. Tonight, we are going on a gentle journey through the fascinating corners of science, biology, and history. Before we begin, please know that the screen will fade to dark very soon. You can safely rest your eyes and leave this video playing as you drift off to sleep. I would also love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below with a general topic you would like me to cover in a future video. It is always a pleasure to read your ideas and shape this channel around what brings you peace. If you find comfort in this space, a like and a subscribe would be deeply appreciated. To ensure the next video quietly finds its way to you, please tap the notification bell. So as your breathing slows and your room grows a little darker, let your curiosity drift along with my voice. Let us begin. The air in Italy's Veneto region is thick with history. It hangs in the canals of Venice. It settles in the quiet squares of smaller towns. For generations here, one family carried a different kind of weight. A secret, a story passed down in whispers. A strange inheritance, not of wealth or land, but of a curse. A sentence, one that stole the night and then stole life itself. Imagine a family tree drawn on old parchment. The names stretch back through the centuries. But look closer. You'd see too many dates clustered in middle age. A grandfather gone at 52, an aunt at 48, a cousin at 55. Premature, unexplained deaths. The stories about them were vague, a sudden, relentless nervousness. A terrible wasting away, a madness that descended like a fog. And always the mention of sleeplessness. Not a bad night or two, but a permanent, terrifying wakefulness. For this family, sleep was not a refuge. It was the thing that abandoned them and sealed their fate. By the 1980s, the mystery couldn't stay in the shadows. Modern medicine was knocking. The family's story found its way to a neurologist in Bologna, a man named Dr. Elio Lugaresi. He was a sleep specialist. He thought he understood its disorders, but what he encountered was something entirely new. Something beyond insomnia. Family members began to arrive at his clinic. They were in their 40s and 50s. They came with a common, desperate complaint. They could not sleep. Not at all. It started subtly, a little restlessness, some anxiety. But it escalated fast. The anxiety exploded into full-blown panic attacks, heart racing, sweating, a feeling of sheer terror for no clear reason. Their bodies were in a constant state of alarm. Night after night, they'd lie in bed, exhausted but utterly awake. Their eyes stayed open. Their minds raced. Sleep simply refused to come. This wasn't the tossing and turning of stress. This was a switch being flipped off. The very ability to fall asleep was being erased. Dr. Lugaresi had them monitored. He saw the flat, sleepless lines on their brainwave charts night after night. It was a clinical impossibility unfolding before him. Then, the horror deepened. As the sleeplessness became total, their minds began to unravel. They saw things that weren't there. They heard voices. Their personalities changed. They became agitated, then distant. Their bodies started to fail. They lost weight dramatically, no matter how much they ate. Their blood pressure became erratic. Their temperature control broke down. They sweated profusely. Their once normal functions were slipping into chaos. The decline was shockingly rapid. From the first stubborn night of insomnia to complete physical and mental disintegration took mere months. 9 months, 12, 18. There was no reversal, no remission. Every treatment Dr. Lugaresi tried failed. Sleeping pills were useless. Sedatives did nothing. It was as if the brain's receiver for sleep was gone. The patients were trapped in a permanent waking nightmare. And then they would die. Exhausted, delirious, and gone. Dr. Lugaresi was baffled. This wasn't a psychiatric illness. This was a savage biological attack, and it clearly ran in the family. He saw the pattern. He listened to the history. He realized he was looking at a new disease, a purely genetic one. He gave it a name that was both simple and dreadful. Fatal familial insomnia. The words said it all. It was in the family. It was fatal, and its core terrifying feature was the loss of sleep. Here was a medical riddle wrapped in a human tragedy. A family that lived with this shadow for generations now had a scientific name for their curse. But a name wasn't an answer. What was happening inside their brains? How could a single flaw inherited from a parent lead to this total waking death? And what did this terrible disease reveal about sleep itself? That it isn't just a luxury or a quiet time, it is a biological imperative, as vital as air or water. And this family, through their suffering, was about to prove it in the most heartbreaking way possible. And so, the story landed on the desk of a neurologist, a medical detective. His name was Dr. Elio Lugaresi at the University of Bologna. He wasn't just listening to old stories anymore, he was about to meet living patients. Members of this family in the grip of the curse. He began to document and observe with a scientist's careful eye. What he saw was a pattern emerging from the chaos. A clinical portrait of a monster. The first patients presented with what seemed like a severe anxiety disorder. Panic attacks. Sweating. A racing heart. But then came the insomnia. Not just trouble sleeping, a complete rebellion against sleep itself. Nights became a frantic waking hell. Patients described feeling perpetually on the edge, terrified but wide awake. Lugaresi and his team ruled out psychiatric causes. This wasn't in the mind. This was something attacking the body's most basic automatic functions. The patient's blood pressure swung wildly. Their body temperatures soared. They stopped sweating, then poured sweat. Their pupils became tiny pinpricks. This was autonomic failure. The body's internal government was collapsing, and then the mind began to fray. Hallucinations, both visual and auditory. Confusion, memory lapses deepened into a rapid, profound dementia. Within months, a vibrant person was reduced to a state of mute exhaustion. Yet their eyes remained open. They were awake. Always awake. The final stage was a kind of living statue, unable to speak or move purposefully, yet trapped in a relentless conscious decline. Death always came from infection or total system shutdown, usually within a year or two. It was a horrifyingly consistent script. Every patient from this family followed it step by grueling step. Dr. Lugaresi had mapped the horror. He gave it a name in the 1980s. Fatal familial insomnia. But what was the cause? A toxin? A virus? The answer came from an unexpected direction. Another neurological nightmare was being unraveled at the time. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or CJD. A rapidly progressive dementia that left the brain looking like a sponge full of holes. And then there was Kuru, the ritual cannibalism-linked disease in Papua New Guinea. These were called the transmissible spongiform encephalopathies. They could incredibly be passed from one brain to another, and in the late 1980s, the agent of infection was identified, not a virus or a bacterium, but a protein, a prion. A prion is a protein gone rogue. Normally, proteins in our bodies fold into precise, useful shapes. A prion is misfolded, and it has a terrifying property. When it touches its normal counterpart, it forces that healthy protein to misfold too. It's a chain reaction, a corruption that spreads through the brain, clumping into plaques, killing neurons, leaving those characteristic spongy holes. The brain literally eats itself alive. When researchers looked at the brains of fatal familial insomnia patients after death, they saw it, that same spongy degeneration, but with a crucial telling difference. In fatal familial insomnia, the devastation was focused, concentrated with brutal precision on one deep central brain structure, the thalamus. The thalamus is the brain's grand central station. Almost every signal from your body sight, sound, touch, pain passes through it on its way to the conscious cortex. It's also a crucial regulator, a gatekeeper for sleep. It helps generate the brain waves of deep restorative sleep. In fatal familial insomnia, the prion corruption zeroes in on this hub. It systematically destroys the thalamus. That's why sleep becomes impossible. The switch is broken. The gate is shattered. The station is on fire. This discovery placed fatal familial insomnia firmly on the spectrum of prion diseases, a genetic inheritable form of this protein madness. But the final piece of the puzzle was still missing. How was it inherited? The family tree was a perfect map of an autosomal dominant disease. If one parent had the mutated gene, a child had a 50-50 chance of inheriting it, and if they did, the disease appeared generation after generation, no skipping. In the early 1990s, genetic technology caught up to the mystery. Researchers went looking for the gene. They found it on chromosome 20, the PRNP gene which provides the blueprint for the normal prion protein. And there in every affected family member was the exact spelling error. A single point mutation. One tiny change in a string of DNA thousands of letters long. They called it the D178N mutation. But there was a twist, a genetic nuance that decided fate. We all have a variation at another spot on the same gene called codon 129. You can inherit the amino acid methionine there or valine. It's like a genetic accent. In people with the D178N mutation, if they also had methionine at codon 129, they developed fatal familial insomnia, the complete terrible syndrome. If they had valine at that same spot, they developed a different but related form of genetic prion disease. The mutation was the gun. The genetic background at codon 129 aimed it. This was the code. Cracked. So the curse had a name, a mechanism, and an address in the human genome. It was no longer a phantom. It was a single errant letter in the book of life, a typo that deleted sleep. For the family, this knowledge was a double-edged sword. It brought the cold comfort of an answer, but it also made the inheritance terrifyingly clear. A simple blood test could now reveal decades in advance who carried the mutation. Who was living on borrowed time? The medical detectives had solved the mystery, but in doing so, they handed the family a map of a terrifying future. One they could see but could not change. Not yet. The question now shifted from what to how. How does this single protein misfold? How does it target the thalamus with such vicious specificity? And what exactly happens inside a brain that is denied completely and forever the refuge of sleep? That is where our story turns next, to the biology of the siege. But Lugaresi noticed something else, something that didn't fit the psychiatric picture at all. His patients weren't just anxious. They couldn't sleep. This wasn't just a bad night. It was a wall, a complete and total blockade. Night after night, their eyes stayed open. Their minds raced. And as the sleepless nights piled up, the panic attacks gave way to something stranger, something darker. Vivid hallucinations, a body wasting away at a terrifying speed. This was no ordinary insomnia. This was something systematically unmaking a person. And Lugaresi had a terrible suspicion about where in the brain this was happening. To understand the horror of what comes next, we need to take a detour into the brain itself. Think of the human brain not as a thinking machine, but as a city of 100 billion citizens, the neurons. They communicate through a buzzing network of streets and signals. And right at the very center of this city, there's a sort of grand central station, a hub. Its name is the thalamus. It's a small, dual-lobe structure buried deep inside. For decades, its function was a mystery, but we now know it's the brain's master switchboard. Almost every single signal from your body, the feeling of your clothes on your skin, the sound of my voice, the light from your window, it all routes through the thalamus on its way to the conscious parts of your brain. It decides what gets your attention. But perhaps its most vital job is one we only notice when it breaks. The thalamus is your sleep switch. It contains the precise circuitry that allows your brain to slip from wakefulness into the deep, restorative waves of slow-wave sleep and then into the dream theater of REM sleep. It's the conductor of the orchestra of consciousness, cueing the sections to play and then, crucially, to rest. In a healthy brain, every single night, the thalamus performs this miracle on schedule. In fatal familial insomnia, it is ground zero, so what attacks it? It's not a virus, it's not a bacteria, it's not even alive. The culprit is a protein gone terribly wrong. We call it a prion, pronounced P-R-E-on. The word comes from proteinaceous, infectious particle. And that's the terrifying key. It's infectious, but not in the usual way. Think of a normal, healthy protein in your brain as a piece of paper, neatly folded into an origami swan. It's beautiful. It works perfectly. A prion is that same piece of paper, but crumpled into a tight, sticky, misshapen ball. This crumpled ball has a dreadful property. When it bumps into a perfectly folded swan, it forces that swan to crumple up too, to become just like it. And that new crumpled ball then goes on to corrupt another swan, and another. It's a catastrophic chain reaction, a domino fall of misfolding. These sticky, crumpled prion proteins start to clump together. They form plaques. They choke the neurons from the inside. The brain tissue, under a microscope, starts to look like a sponge full of tiny holes. This is called spongiform degeneration. The brain is literally eroding. In most prion diseases, like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, this process happens broadly across the cortex, the thinking part of the brain. But fatal familial insomnia is a sniper, not a bomb. The specific genetic mutation known as D178N on a gene called PRNP creates a prion with a particularly vicious address label. It tells the misfolded protein to go to the thalamus, almost exclusively. So while the rest of the brain may look relatively normal, the thalamus is under a silent, relentless siege. Neuron by neuron, the prions accumulate. The grand central station goes dark. The switchboard operators fall silent. The connections are severed. You can imagine the thalamus in these patients not as a city being bombed, but as a forest in a deadly frost. Each neuron is a leaf, the prion is the cold. One by one, the leaves don't just die and fall. They crystallize. They become brittle. and then they turn to dust. And as more leaves crystallize, the entire structure of the forest, the canopy that regulates the internal climate, collapses. From the outside, at first, you just see a tree looking sickly. That's the panic attacks, the sweating. But as the forest dies, the entire ecosystem fails. No more shade, no more oxygen, no more life. That is the mechanical horror of FFI. A single misprinted letter in a person's genetic code, a single typo, programs a protein to misfold. That misfolded protein then seeks out and destroys with chilling precision the one part of the brain that allows for the escape of sleep. The siege is absolute. The thalamus isn't just damaged, it is systematically dismantled. The gates to sleep are not locked, they are annihilated. And so the person is left inside a brain that can no longer shut down. A brain stuck in permanent, glaring wakefulness. The sensory relay station goes haywire, causing hallucinations. The autonomic control fails, leading to soaring blood pressure, sweating, impotence. The mind, deprived of the essential maintenance that only sleep can provide, begins to crumble into dementia, all because a tiny protein in the deepest central hub of the self forgot how to fold. This isn't a metaphor. For the families living with this gene, this is the precise cellular reality of their fate. A fate written in a protein targeting a thumb-sized piece of brain. With this grim mechanism understood, the medical detectives could now chart the inevitable course of the disease. They could map the descent. To understand what happens next, you have to understand the thalamus. It's a small, walnut-sized structure deep in the center of your brain. Think of it as the grand central station of your consciousness. Almost every signal from your body, every sight, sound and touch passes through its gates on the way to your conscious mind. And crucially, it's the master regulator of sleep. It generates the slow, rhythmic brain waves that lull you into slumber. It's the switch that turns consciousness off. In fatal familial insomnia, that switch is systematically destroyed. The mutant prion protein, born from a single genetic error, accumulates. It folds into a toxic shape, and it has a specific target, the neurons of the thalamus. One by one, these crucial brain cells begin to die. They literally develop holes, giving the brain a spongy appearance. This is called a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. The thalamus is being eaten away from the inside. And as it crumbles, so does the person. The progression is so predictable and horrifyingly consistent that doctors chart it in 4 distinct stages. It's a clinical roadmap to a waking death. It begins quietly and insidiously. This is stage 1. A person in their 40s or 50s who's lived a perfectly normal life starts having trouble sleeping. It's not just a restless night. It's a profound, stubborn insomnia that no sleeping pill can touch. The brain sleep switch is already flickering. Alongside this comes a creeping, unexplainable anxiety. Panic attacks for no reason, strange, persistent phobias. A family might think it's a nervous breakdown or a midlife crisis, but it's not. It's the first threads of the thalamus unraveling. This stage can last for several months. Then, the descent accelerates into stage 2. The hallucinations begin. And these aren't vague shadows. They're vivid, elaborate, and often terrifying. Patients see people who aren't there. They have complex delusions. The world around them becomes a waking dream, but one they can't escape, because they aren't dreaming. They're trapped in a hyper-alert, broken state of consciousness. Their body begins to rebel. The autonomic nervous system, which controls things we never think about, goes haywire. Blood pressure skyrockets, heart rate soars, they sweat profusely. Their body temperature fluctuates wildly, and they start to waste away. Severe, rapid weight loss sets in no matter how much they eat. The body is burning itself alive, stuck in a permanent state of fight or flight. Sleep is now a distant memory. Then comes the border, the crossing into stage 3. This is the hallmark of the disease, the total, absolute inability to sleep. Not for a minute, not for a second. The patient is now completely, irrevocably awake. The thalamus has lost all capacity to generate sleep. The mind, deprived of this fundamental reset, begins to disintegrate with shocking speed. Cognitive function plummets. Memory evaporates. Speech becomes slurred, then incoherent. Within weeks, a sharp, capable adult descends into a profound dementia. They may not recognize their own family. They're confused, agitated, lost in a perpetual, exhausting now. The physical wasting is severe. They become gaunt and frail. This stage is often the longest, a cruel plateau of unending wakefulness. Finally, there is stage 4, the end stage. The patient becomes mute and unresponsive. They may stare blankly, or their eyes may dart frantically, but there's no one home. The thalamus is essentially gone. The bridge between the body and the mind has collapsed. The autonomic failure is complete. The body can no longer regulate its most basic functions. In this utterly vulnerable state, death usually comes from a secondary infection, like pneumonia, or the heart simply gives out from the relentless strain. From the first symptom to this final silence, the entire journey typically takes between 7 and 36 months. On average, it's about 18. This is the clinical reality. A predictable, stage-by-stage unmaking. But to call it a sleeplessness is almost too simple. It's not just an absence of sleep, it's the active, terrifying presence of something else. A permanent, panicked wakefulness. Imagine the feeling you have after 2 nights without sleep, that jittery, raw-nerved, hallucinatory edge. Now imagine that feeling not for 2 nights but for 200, and imagine it getting worse every single day. That is the descent. The disease offers no respite, no quiet moments. The slow wave sleep, the deep restorative sleep, is the first to go. Then the REM sleep, the dream sleep, vanishes. Finally, all of it. The brain's electroencephalogram, or EEG, which should show beautiful rolling waves of sleep activity, becomes a flat, fast, frantic line. It's the EEG of someone who is wide awake forever. There are stories from caregivers of patients in the later stages, their eyes wide open, fingers plucking frantically at the bedsheets in a motion doctors call pillowing, as if they're trying to grasp at something, anything, in the void. Of whispered, confused phrases that make no sense. Of a profound physical exhaustion that never, ever finds relief. This is what the genetic mutation does. It doesn't cause a stroke or a tumor. It doesn't paralyze the limbs. It surgically removes piece by piece the brain's ability to shut down, to rest, to dream. It leaves the mind fully conscious, fully aware of its own disintegration, until even that awareness flickers and dies. The 4 stages are a medical framework, a way for doctors to track the untrackable. But for a family, it's not a chart, it's a countdown. They watch a spouse, a parent, a sibling, transform from the person they knew into a panicked stranger, then into a hallucinating ghost, and finally into a silent shell. All while being heartbreakingly, undeniably awake. And every family member who carries the gene knows with absolute certainty that this is their future too. They're waiting for their own stage 1 to begin. They're living on a genetic island, watching the tide come in. The next chapter of our story is about life on that island. It's about the weight of that knowledge, the impossible choices it forces, and the ethical storm that surrounds a family who can see their fate written in their own DNA. So the mutation is identified. The mechanism is understood. The tragic progression is mapped. But for the families living with this knowledge, a new and terrible question now presents itself. It's a question that arrives not in a clinic, but in the quiet of the night. In the space between heartbeats, do you want to know your fate? For the children of a parent with FFI or fatal familial insomnia, the discovery of the gene didn't just solve a medical mystery. It handed them a loaded genetic coin, a 50-50 chance. Heads, you inherit a normal life. Tails, you inherit a death sentence with no parole. And because the disease is autosomal, dominant with 100% penetrance, that coin flip is absolute. If you have the mutation, you will get the disease. There is no maybe. This knowledge transforms entire families into what some have called genetic islands. Isolated archipelagos of fate scattered across the globe. Beyond the original Italian kindred, small clusters have been identified in the United States, in Germany, and in Australia. Each one is a separate island, sharing the same terrible secret in their DNA. On these islands, every family gathering has an unspoken subtext. Every cough, every moment of forgetfulness in a middle-aged relative, is it just a cough, or is it the beginning? The silence becomes a presence in the room. The family tree becomes not a record of lineage, but a map of impending loss. The branches are not spreading with life, but marked with little crosses. Dates of diagnosis, dates of death, a pattern so clear and so cruel it feels predestined. And in the middle of this sits the modern tool of predictive genetic testing. A simple blood test can tell you, decades before symptoms appear, which side of the coin you're on. This is the central, wrenching ethical dilemma of FFI. Do you look, or do you live in the shadow, not knowing if the shadow is actually your own? From a clinical standpoint, the argument against testing seems clear. There is no cure, no treatment to slow the disease. Knowing offers no medical benefit. It only offers a countdown. A healthy, asymptomatic person could get that result and then have to carry it for 30 years. Watching the clock. Waiting for the first night they can't sleep. That's an almost unimaginable psychological burden. Bioethicists call this the right not to know. It's the idea that some knowledge is so devastating and so without recourse that a person has an ethical right to refuse it, to preserve their present life from being utterly consumed by a future tragedy. But the argument for testing is equally powerful and deeply human. It's about agency, about ending the terrible uncertainty. For some, not knowing is the greater torture. Every headache is a tumor. Every sleepless night is the start. Testing provides a brutal but clean answer. It allows them to plan, to live their remaining healthy years with fierce intention, to make financial decisions, to have children or not with full awareness of the genetic risk. It allows them to say their goodbyes before the dementia steals their voice. These aren't abstract debates, they are lived realities with voices that crack with the weight of the choice. In interviews, family members have spoken about this crossroads. One woman from an affected family described the moment her sister decided to test. They sat together holding hands, waiting for the phone call with the results. The silence in the room was so heavy. When the result came back positive, she said it was like watching her sister receive a terminal diagnosis on a day she was perfectly healthy. The grief for a future loss began right then. Another man chose never to be tested. He said he couldn't bear the idea of a number in his head, a count of the good years left. He decided to live as if he were free, while secretly knowing he was probably not. Every time he put his children to bed, he wondered if he'd see them graduate. It was a different kind of limbo. Then there are the stories of those who tested negative, the survivors of the genetic coin toss. Their relief is profound, but often tinged with what's called survivor's guilt. Why was I spared when my brother was not? It can fracture families. The lucky and the doomed living under the same roof with a chasm between them they didn't create. The genetic island becomes divided within itself. And for the next generation, the ethical questions multiply. Should you test your children? Most guidelines strongly advise against testing minors for adult onset conditions with no treatment. But what about when they turn 18? Do you, as a parent, encourage them to find out? Or do you protect them from the knowledge that haunted you? And then, the most intimate question of all, reproduction. If you have the mutation, do you have biological children, knowing there's a 50% chance you will pass on this relentless disease? Some choose to have children naturally, accepting the risk. Others turn to in vitro fertilization with pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. This is a process where embryos are created in a lab, tested for the FFI mutation, and only those without it are implanted. It's a way to ensure the genetic line is not passed on. But it's expensive, it's complex, and for some, it feels like a clinical intervention into the most fundamental act of life. These are the storms that rage on these quiet genetic islands. They are not medical storms, they are storms of the human spirit, of conscience, of love trying to navigate an impossible map. The science gave them an answer to why, but it could not give them an answer to how. How to live with this. How to choose. The tragedy of FFI is not confined to the final, sleepless months. It begins the moment the family learns its true name. It's a lifelong companion, a whisper in the ear of every at-risk member from adolescence onward. Is tonight the night my insomnia begins? That question changes everything. It changes how you value a simple, deep, restful night of sleep. It makes it a treasure. And it changes how you view the dawn. For most of us, sunrise is a promise of a new day. For those on the island, it can also be a reprieve. One more night conquered. One more step back from the edge they are forever circling. The question hangs in the air. A genetic coin still spinning for some. To know or not to know. To live with the shadow or the certain shape of the thing itself. It is a profoundly human dilemma, born from a profoundly inhuman disease. But if we pull back, far back from those intimate family decisions, we find something else. A terrible, tragic experiment. One that nature, in its cruel indifference, has been running for generations. And from this experiment, from the absolute suffering of those with fatal familial insomnia, comes an answer to one of life's oldest, most basic questions. Why do we sleep? For centuries, sleep was seen as a kind of pause, a blank space, a time of quiet, of nothingness. Something you could, perhaps, cheat a little, skip a night, power through. The story of fatal familial insomnia shatters that notion completely. It tells us, in the most unambiguous terms possible, that sleep is not a luxury, it is not optional, it is a biological imperative, as fundamental as water, as oxygen. Think of the historic sleep deprivation experiments. In the 1960s, a high school student named Randy Gardner stayed awake for 11 days as a science fair project. He became paranoid, hallucinated, his cognitive functions crumbled. But he slept, and he recovered. Fatal familial insomnia is different. It is not about staying awake, it is about the brain losing the very machinery for sleep. The thalamus isn't just tired, it is being consumed. eaten away by misshapen proteins. And when that switch is permanently broken, the result is not just exhaustion, it is a total systemic collapse. The mind unravels. The body forgets how to regulate itself. The person, in every sense that matters, dissolves. This is the ultimate warning. A warning written not in a textbook, but in the broken biology of families. It tells us that sleep is an active, vigorous process, a period of intense neurological housekeeping. Memory consolidation, cellular repair, toxin clearance, all orchestrated by deep brain structures like the thalamus. Without it, the system poisons itself. The mind drowns in its own metabolic waste. The gears of the body, one by one, seize up. The patients of fatal familial insomnia did not choose this experiment. They were its unwilling, heartbreaking subjects. But in their suffering, they gave science a pure, horrifying look at a truth we often ignore. They proved that sleep is a pillar of life itself, one of the 3 pillars, you might say. Alongside food and water, we can survive weeks without food, days without water. But without sleep, the clock starts ticking immediately. And in fatal familial insomnia, that clock runs out in months. So what is the legacy of this disease? Beyond the grief, beyond the medical mystery solved, it is a shift in our understanding. Before and after. Before. Fatal familial insomnia was understood. Severe insomnia was a symptom. A terrible one, but a symptom of something else. Anxiety, psychosis, pain. Fatal familial insomnia redefined it. It showed that insomnia could be the disease itself, the direct cause of death. This realization sent ripples through neurology and sleep science. It forced researchers to ask new questions. If the thalamus is this crucial, what happens when it's only damaged, not destroyed? Could milder thalamic dysfunction explain other, more common sleep disorders? The relentless wakefulness of some types of fatal insomnia, even without the known genetic cause, points to similar pathways gone awry. The study of these sporadic cases and of fatal familial insomnia itself continues. The hope is not yet for a cure for this specific brutal disease. That remains elusive. The hope is that by understanding this catastrophic failure, we might learn how to fix smaller breakdowns, to help the millions who struggle with sleep but who will not share this fate. The island where people forget how to sleep is a desolate place, but from its shores we can see the mainland of normal life with terrifying clarity. We see what holds that mainland together. We take a good night's sleep for granted. We trade it for another hour of work or entertainment or worry. We wear our exhaustion like a badge of honor. The story of fatal familial insomnia strips away that illusion. It whispers a stark truth in the dark. Sleep is not downtime. It is a lifeline. Every night, as your thalamus hums its quiet tune, and your consciousness gently dissolves into waves of slow wave and REM sleep, a vital restoration is underway. Your brain is washing itself clean. Your memories are being filed. Your body is being tuned. It is not a passive state. It is a nightly journey to the very foundation of who you are. The people on that genetic island are tragically denied that journey. They are trapped on the shore of wakefulness, watching the vital tide go out forever. Their story is a plea, written in the language of neuroscience and grief. A plea to the rest of us on the mainland who still have the gift. Do not take the voyage for granted. Honor the process. Protect it. For in the end, the lesson of this entire sorrowful history is devastatingly simple. To sleep is to live, and the ultimate warning from that lonely island is this: without one, you cannot have the other. We have reached the end of tonight's topics, and it is time to let your mind completely unwind. Whatever you learned tonight, let it fade into a soft hum as you drift off. Thank you for being a part of Night Shift Knowledge and sharing this quiet space with me. Remember to leave a topic suggestion for next time if you are still awake, but for now, just rest. Sleep well, and I will be here the next time you need to quiet your mind. Good night.